Please follow me. The little black girl told the biker as metal bars slammed deeper inside the inspection tunnel. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. The night was dark and heavy, the kind of night where anything could happen. A small figure darted through the dimly lit alley, her tiny feet pounding against the cold concrete as she ran for her life. The air smelled faintly of motor oil, and the distant sound of roaring engines filled the night. In the heart of the city, the atmosphere was charged with tension, like the calm before a storm. She was alone, lost, and scared, but she had no choice. There was nowhere else to go. Her heart raced as she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, growing louder with every second. She glanced over her shoulder, and her breath caught in her throat. They were getting closer. Her small hands trembled as she wiped away the tears that blurred her vision. She had to keep moving. She had to find them. The bikers. The only people who might save her. Her legs ached, but she didn't stop. She could hear their voices, loud and rough, talking in low tones at the biker bar down the street. She was almost there. Just a few more steps. She could make it. As she neared the entrance, she saw them. The group of bikers, standing tall, their leather jackets glistening in the faint light of the street lamp. They turned their heads in unison, sensing her approach. Without missing a beat, she ran straight into the nearest biker's arms, clutching his leather vest with a desperate cry. "Please," she sobbed, "follow me." Her voice was shaking, but the words were clear. The biker looked down at her, his eyes scanning her face, taking in the fear that radiated from her. Without a word, he gently placed his hand on her shoulder and motioned for the others to move. They didn't need to ask questions. The moment she spoke, they knew. They were a family, and in this family, no one was left behind. As they followed her into the shadows, the sound of their boots echoing through the alley, the air thickened with anticipation. The mission was simple: protect her. They had no idea who was after her, but it didn't matter. The rules were clear. You protect those who need it, no questions asked. As they moved, the girl's eyes flicked back to the dark tunnel ahead of them. The entrance to the inspection tunnel loomed large, a cold, metallic structure that sent a chill down her spine. She knew what lay inside. She had been there before, and she never wanted to go back. But now, it was her only hope. She couldn't do it alone. She needed them. The bikers. The ones who had promised to stand by her, no matter the cost. And as the last of the metal bars slammed into place behind them, sealing the tunnel shut, she realized something. She had just crossed a line from which there would be no turning back. The bikers had followed her into the unknown, and they weren't about to let anyone harm her. I hope you're still with us, because the story has just begun. The girl's footsteps echoed down the narrow tunnel, her breathing rapid and shallow. The metal bars had slammed into place behind her, and now the group of bikers moved in unison, surrounding her like a protective wall. The harsh fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. It felt like the world outside had disappeared, and the only thing that mattered now was getting her to safety. The biker who had caught her as she ran into the bar was now at the front, his leather vest gleaming in the dim light. His name was Jake, and he was known for his calm under pressure, but even now, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We're not alone," he muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the dark tunnel ahead. The others, the men and women who had sworn loyalty to one another in their club, didn't speak, but they all knew. This was no ordinary night, and whatever was chasing this little girl, it was not something they could ignore. The girl Aisha, barely 10 years old, clutched the biker's arm, her small fingers trembling. She had stopped crying for the moment, but her face was still pale with fear. Jake knelt down to her level, keeping his voice low, so only she could hear. "You're safe now. We've got you. Just tell us what happened." Aisha looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear, but also a flicker of hope. She had been running for what felt like hours, but she didn't know where to go. The man who had been chasing her was relentless. He had promised her mother that he would keep her safe, but now, after the last few days, she had no one left to trust. "He's coming for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know who he is, but I think he's part of the gang. They're everywhere. I saw them last night, talking to my mom. She told me to run. She said they would hurt me if I stayed. Jake's heart clenched. He had seen enough violence in his life, but this was different. A child shouldn't have to live in fear like this. He glanced at the rest of the group, his face hardening. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice steady but firm. But for now, we get out of here. The bikers moved swiftly, their boots making no sound against the concrete floor. They had to be quiet, careful. The last thing they needed was a full-blown confrontation right here. Aisha looked up at Jake, confusion in her eyes. Are we going to fight them? She asked. Jake paused for a moment, considering her words. If we have to, he said. But we're not looking for a fight. We're just going to keep moving, and if they try anything, we'll be ready. He turned back to the group, his gaze sharp. Let's go. We need to make sure no one sees us. The tunnel stretched out ahead of them, dark and cold, with only the occasional hum of machinery to break the silence. It felt like they were walking through an abandoned world, a place where time had no meaning. The group moved quickly but cautiously, the sounds of their movements swallowed up by the vast emptiness around them. As they walked, Aisha's mind raced. She could barely remember the last few days. It was all a blur. Her mother's warnings, the strange men who had appeared at their door, the fear that had crept into their lives. She had tried to escape, but no matter where she went, it seemed like they were always right behind her. And now, as she walked beside these bikers, she realized something. They were the first people who had ever made her feel safe. Her mother had always told her that the world was a dangerous place, but she had never imagined it could be this bad. She glanced up at Jake again. Who are they? She asked. Jake gave a half smile, but there was no humor in it. We're the Iron Riders. And right now, we're the only thing standing between you and whoever is trying to hurt you. Aisha looked down at her feet, the sound of their boots echoing in the tunnel. She had never felt so alone, yet so protected at the same time. The bikers had no idea what they were up against, but they were determined to find out. They would fight for her, no matter what. As they neared the end of the tunnel, the flicker of light ahead grew brighter. They were getting closer to the outside world, but Aisha knew that the danger wasn't over. The real fight was just beginning. I hope you're ready, because things are about to take a turn. The group had moved quickly through the tunnel, their boots echoing in the cold silence. But the light ahead wasn't just a way out. It was a warning. Jake's hand instinctively went to his side, checking the gun hidden under his jacket, just in case. The air had a sharpness to it, the kind that felt like danger was lurking around every corner. Aisha, walking quietly beside him, glanced up at the looming metal door ahead. Are they waiting for us? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jake didn't look at her, keeping his eyes fixed on the door. He could feel the tension building in his chest. I don't know, but we're not going to let them take you. He knew it wasn't just about protecting her anymore. This had become personal. The girl was running from something much bigger than he could have anticipated. As they approached the door, the sound of distant engines rumbled in the background. It wasn't just one or two bikes. There was a whole fleet waiting, and they were closing in fast. Get ready, Jake said to the rest of the group. We move as one. The group formed a protective circle around Aisha, their faces hard with determination. The bikers had no idea who these people were, but they weren't about to let them take one of their own. The door creaked open slowly, the heavy metal scraping against the rusted track. The air outside hit them like a wave, cold and filled with the faint smell of exhaust and oil. The bikers' bikes were lined up just outside, their engines growling as the riders revved them up in preparation. Jake stepped forward, holding up his hand to signal the group to halt. There was no turning back now. The men standing outside weren't ordinary thugs. They were organized, well-equipped, and they'd been waiting for Aisha. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. These weren't just men after her. This was an entire operation. Aisha's heart raced as she stepped closer to Jake, clutching his arm. What do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling. Jake turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes. We do what we always do. We protect our own. The leader of the group outside, a tall man in a dark leather jacket, stepped forward. His face was obscured by a pair of dark sunglasses, but Aisha could feel his gaze on her, cold and unrelenting. He raised his hand, signaling his men to step back. She's with us now, Jake said, his voice steady. The leader of the group laughed, the sound low and dangerous. She was never yours, he sneered. She belongs to us. Jake's eyes narrowed. Not while I'm breathing. Without a word, the bikers moved. The roar of their engines filled the air as they gunned their bikes and sped toward the men standing outside. The fight was on. Aisha's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. She had never seen anything like it before. Bikers charging into battle, their bikes slicing through the darkness like a wave crashing on the shore. The men outside were armed, but the bikers didn't hesitate. Jake led the charge, his bike roaring as he cut through the line of enemies. His fists were ready, his mind focused on one thing only, protecting Aisha. The sound of metal clashing against metal filled the air as the two sides collided. Aisha could hear the grunts, the shouts, the sickening thud of punches landing. Her eyes darted from one biker to another, watching as they fought fiercely, not just for themselves, but for her. She had no idea how to react. She had never been in a fight like this before. Her small hands were shaking as she watched the chaos unfold in front of her. But then she felt it, the grip of Jake's hand on her arm, pulling her to the side. Stay close, he ordered. We're getting out of here. As the battle raged on, the bikers pushed forward, inch by inch, until the fight was finally over. The men outside had been defeated, but Jake knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. We need to go, Jake said, his voice low and urgent. Now. The group moved quickly, retreating into the darkness of the night. The engines of their bikes roared to life once more as they sped down the road, leaving behind the wreckage of the battle. Aisha held on to Jake tightly, her mind spinning with everything that had just happened. She had been saved, but for how long? Who were these men who had come after her? And what did they want? Jake looked over at her, his eyes hard and focused. You're safe for now, he said. But this isn't over. We're going to keep you safe, no matter what. Aisha nodded, but inside, she was already starting to feel the weight of the truth. This fight wasn't just for her, it was for her future, and it was a fight she wasn't sure she was ready for. I hope you're still with us because things are getting even more intense. The bikers' engines roared like a pack of wolves hunting in the night, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they sped down the empty highway. Aisha clutched Jake's leather jacket, the wind rushing past her as they moved further into unknown territory. The city they had just left behind was now a distant memory, but the danger still loomed ahead. Jake kept his focus, eyes scanning the road ahead, his mind working on overdrive. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. They had to face whatever was coming, and they had to do it together. The group of bikers had rallied around Aisha, offering their protection without question. But now, as the night stretched on and the sound of pursuit faded, there was an unspoken understanding among them. This wasn't just about keeping Aisha safe anymore. This was about taking a stand. The road ahead stretched for miles, an endless ribbon of asphalt surrounded by dark trees and open fields. Aisha's thoughts kept racing, but it was hard to think clearly. She had never been in a situation like this before. Just days ago, she had been at home, playing in her yard, oblivious to the chaos that was about to engulf her life. Now, here she was, riding with a group of strangers who had become her only family, her only hope. The group slowed as they neared a small clearing, a break in the trees. Jake signaled for everyone to stop, and they pulled off to the side of the road. The riders dismounted their bikes, and the air was filled with the sound of helmets being removed and engines being shut off. Aisha felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she looked around at the group. They were battle-worn, their faces etched with experiences she couldn't yet understand. But there was one thing she knew for sure. They had her back. Jake walked over to her, his eyes softening as he placed a hand on her shoulder. You okay? He asked. Aisha nodded, though the fear still lingered in her chest. She wasn't sure what was waiting for them, but she had to admit, she was scared. I'm scared, she whispered. I don't know what's happening. Jake's expression grew serious, and he crouched down to her level. I know, but you're not alone in this, Aisha. We've got you, and we're not letting you go. Not now, not ever. Aisha swallowed hard. The tears that had been threatening to fall were now starting to well up in her eyes. She had been running for so long, and now, in the safety of these strangers, it felt like the weight of everything was finally catching up to her. What happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. Jake's gaze never wavered. Now we get to work. We don't know who's after you, but we're going to find out. And when we do, we're going to make sure they know exactly who they're messing with." The others gathered around there, faces filled with determination. Each one of them had their own story, their own reasons for being here. Some were veterans, others had spent their lives on the road, but they all shared one thing in common: loyalty. "We stick together, no matter what," Jake said, addressing the group. "Aisha's one of us now, and we'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. You all know the rules. No one gets left behind." The group nodded in unison, and Aisha felt a surge of hope. These weren't just bikers, they were family. The night was still and quiet, but beneath that calm, the tension was building. Jake could feel it. Something was coming, and it was only a matter of time before they had to face it head-on. As the group took a moment to catch their breath, Aisha turned to Jake, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, the uncertainty clear in her eyes. Jake gave her a reassuring smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We have to. For you." The silence between them was filled with the unspoken weight of the promise he had made to her father years ago. A promise that, no matter what, he would protect her. And now, as they sat in the stillness of the night, Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of that promise more than ever. It wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a matter of honor. The group stood up, ready to move again. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they weren't alone. With the roar of their engines once again filling the air, they set off into the night, determined to find the answers they sought. Aisha looked ahead, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. With these bikers by her side, she wasn't going to face it alone. "I hope you're ready because the road ahead is about to get even more intense." The group had been riding for hours, the wind biting at their faces as they made their way through the empty countryside. Aisha sat tightly against Jake, clutching his leather jacket as they sped down the highway. The dark night sky stretched endlessly above them, and the rumble of their engines was the only sound that filled the air. But even with the safety of the bikers around her, Aisha could feel the weight of the danger still closing in. She didn't know how much longer they could outrun it. "How much farther?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. Jake glanced at her, his eyes narrowing in thought. "We're getting close, but we need to keep moving. The longer we stay still, the more likely they'll catch up with us." Aisha nodded, her grip tightening. She didn't need to ask who they were. She knew. The people who had been chasing her, the ones who had made her life a living nightmare, were still out there. And no matter how fast they rode, no matter how far they went, they couldn't outrun the past. The bikers had kept a steady pace, sticking to the back roads to avoid detection. They knew the area, had ridden these roads 1,000 times before. It was their advantage, their only chance to stay ahead. But the group couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. A shadow had been following them for miles, staying just out of reach, but close enough to make them uneasy. "We need to stop," Jake said suddenly, his voice sharp. The group slowed and pulled off the road into a small clearing. The bikes came to a stop, their engines dying down as the night fell silent. Jake dismounted first, his eyes scanning the area. The others followed suit, and Aisha felt a twinge of nervousness. They hadn't stopped like this before. They had been on the move, always moving forward, never looking back. "What's going on?" one of the bikers, Phantom, asked. "Something's not right," Jake replied, his voice low. He moved towards Aisha and crouched down to her level. "Stay close. We're not alone." Aisha's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the rumors before, stories about bikers getting caught in ambushes, about groups that would use anyone, even children, to lure their enemies into traps. She had no idea who was after her, but she had a sinking feeling that whatever was coming wasn't going to be easy to escape. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Jake looked at her, his face hard. "We fight if we have to. But first, we need to know who's out there." He motioned for the group to spread out, and they silently fanned out into the trees, their eyes trained on every shadow. Aisha stayed close to Jake, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't want to be left alone, not now. The minutes ticked by slowly, the silence growing heavier with every passing second. And then, just as Jake was about to call the group back together, they heard it, the unmistakable sound of an engine in the distance. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it was getting closer. Aisha's stomach tightened. "They're coming," Jake said, his voice a low growl. "Get ready." The bikers moved into position, their bodies tense, ready for whatever was coming. Jake kept Aisha close, his hand on her arm as he whispered, "Stay behind me." The sound of the engine grew louder, and soon, a pair of headlights appeared on the horizon. The group braced themselves, eyes trained on the road. But as the headlights drew closer, Jake's eyes narrowed. "It's them," he said, his voice hard with determination. "The ones who have been chasing you." Aisha's heart leaped into her throat. She didn't know what to expect, but she could feel the fear building inside her. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. And they were about to face the people who had been trying to take her away from everything she knew. The sound of the engine grew louder, closer. The headlights cut through the trees, and then, they stopped. The bikes came to a halt, their engines idling. For a moment, everything was still. And then, a voice broke the silence. "We know she's with you." A chill ran down Aisha's spine. The voice was low, menacing, and full of intent. "She doesn't belong with you. She belongs with us." The tension in the air was thick, and Aisha could hear the subtle shift in the bikers around her. They were preparing for a fight, but she could see it in their eyes. This was more than just a fight. This was personal, and they weren't going to back down. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady but fierce. "You'll have to go through us first." The leader of the group laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So be it," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "We've been patient, but not anymore." And with that, the standoff began. The group of bikers tensed, the air crackling with anticipation. It was no longer just about protecting Aisha. It was about survival. And the fight that was about to unfold would change everything. I hope you're ready for what's about to unfold. The tension was unbearable, the air thick with the promise of violence. Jake stood at the front, his gaze locked on the men before him, their dark figures barely visible in the dim light of the clearing. The leader of the group sneered, his hands resting on his hips, a silent challenge hanging in the air. The bikers had formed a protective circle around Aisha, their eyes scanning the surroundings, waiting for the first sign of movement. Jake's voice cut through the tension, low and cold. "If you want her, you're going to have to go through us." The leader chuckled, a harsh, mocking sound that sent chills down Aisha's spine. "I don't think you understand. She's not yours to protect. She belongs with us. We have unfinished business." Aisha's heart raced in her chest as she clutched Jake's arm tighter, fear creeping up her throat. The air seemed to grow colder as the two sides stared each other down, the silence stretching out like a ticking clock. Every second felt like an eternity. The leader stepped forward, his men flanking him. Jake's hand instinctively moved to his side, resting on the handle of his knife. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. They weren't going to let Aisha go without a fight. "You don't want to do this," Jake warned, his voice steady but filled with an underlying threat. "Turn around and leave, and no one gets hurt." The leader's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "You're too late for that, old man." He nodded, and the sound of heavy boots crunching against the gravel filled the night air as his men advanced. Aisha's breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively backed up against Jake, the fear consuming her. She had no idea who these men were or what they wanted, but she knew that they wouldn't stop until they had her. Jake's eyes flicked to his team, a silent command passing between them. They were ready. With a sudden movement, the leader lunged forward, swinging a steel pipe with deadly precision. Jake ducked, the pipe grazing past his head. He quickly retaliated, his fists connecting with the leader's chest in a powerful punch that sent him stumbling backward. "Stay behind me," Jake growled to Aisha, his voice a low warning. The rest of the bikers joined the fray, their bodies moving in sync, a well-oiled machine. The clash of metal against leather filled the air as fists flew, the sound of fighting echoing through the clearing. Aisha's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the chaos unfold before her. The bikers weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for her. She had never seen anything like this before, the raw power and the determination in each biker's movements. Jake was in the center of the action, his focus unwavering as he took down one of the attackers with a swift kick to the ribs. But despite their strength, the numbers were against them. More men emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn, and the fight seemed to escalate with each passing moment. Aisha's pulse quickened. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand there. Her eyes darted around the clearing, looking for an opportunity. That's when she saw it. A fallen crowbar on the ground just a few feet away. Without thinking, she scrambled towards it, her hands shaking as she picked it up. The men were too distracted with the bikers to notice her move. Aisha's heart raced, but a new sense of determination flooded her veins. She wasn't going to just hide anymore. She wasn't going to be helpless. With a deep breath, she raised the crowbar, running toward the nearest attacker, and swung it with all the strength she could muster. The metal made contact with the man's knee, and he crumpled to the ground with a yelp of pain. Aisha's eyes widened, surprised at herself for acting on instinct. She didn't have time to think. She just acted. The other bikers noticed what she had done and took advantage of the distraction. Jake saw Aisha standing there, her chest heaving with fear, but her eyes burning with resolve. He couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for her. She wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. She was a fighter. But the battle was far from over. The group was still outnumbered, and the enemy was relentless. "Get back!" Jake shouted to Aisha, motioning for her to move behind him. Once again, she hesitated for a split second before nodding and stepping back, keeping her eyes locked on the fight. The bikers were holding their ground, but Jake knew they couldn't keep this up much longer. Something had to give, and that's when it happened. From the edge of the clearing, a new group of bikers appeared, their engines roaring as they sped toward the fight. Their leader, a massive man with tattoos covering his arms, rode forward, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We heard you needed some help," the new biker leader shouted, his voice booming over the chaos. Jake's face softened with relief. More bikers had arrived, more reinforcements. They were outnumbered no more. With the new reinforcements, the tide of the battle began to turn. The attackers were pushed back, their resolve faltering in the face of overwhelming force. The leader, now on the defensive, glared at Jake and his crew. "This isn't over," he spat. "We'll be back for her." Jake stood tall, his eyes unwavering. "Not if we have anything to say about it." The attackers retreated, disappearing into the shadows from which they came. The bikers, bruised and battered, stood victorious, but it was a hollow victory. They had won the fight, but the war was far from over. Aisha looked at Jake, her heart still racing from the adrenaline. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew one thing. She was no longer alone. And with the bikers by her side, she wasn't going anywhere without a fight. "I hope you're prepared, because the real challenge is about to begin." The night had been filled with the sound of roaring engines and the clash of metal. But now, as the dust settled and the last of the attackers retreated, the tension hung heavy in the air. The bikers, though victorious, were battered and bruised, their clothes torn and faces streaked with sweat and blood. Jake stood tall, surveying the aftermath, his eyes scanning the clearing for any sign of movement. The battle was over for now, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the enemies would return. Aisha stood by his side, her small figure hidden behind the protective wall of bikers. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had surged through her during the fight. She had never imagined herself in such a situation, never thought she would have to fight for her survival. But the bikers had shown her something she hadn't seen before: strength, loyalty, and a bond that went beyond blood. As the group gathered around, catching their breath, Jake's voice broke the silence. "We need to move. Now." The bikers nodded in unison, their faces hard with determination. They had won this battle, but they all knew the war was far from over. The leader of the enemy group had promised they would return, and Jake wasn't about to let that happen. "What's the plan?" one of the bikers, Wrench, asked, wiping the blood from his lip. "We can't keep running forever." Jake's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the road ahead. "We won't run. We'll find out who they are, where they're coming from, and we'll end this, once and for all." Aisha looked up at Jake, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. She had never imagined that she would be part of something so dangerous. But she had also never imagined that she would be surrounded by people who cared so deeply for her safety. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, her voice filled with concern. Jake turned to face her, his expression softened. "We'll keep you safe. That's a promise." As the bikers prepared to move again, Aisha noticed a flicker of uncertainty in some of their eyes. They had all been through so much already, but the path ahead was uncertain. They had no idea who the enemy was, where they were, or what they were capable of. And the clock was ticking. Jake gave a final nod, signaling for everyone to mount their bikes. The engines roared to life once more, and the group began to move again, heading into the unknown. Aisha held on tight as they sped down the road, the night air whipping through her hair. The world seemed to blur as they rode, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife. The further they went, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She had been running from something, but now, she wasn't sure what she was running to. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these men after her? What did they want? And why was she the target? It wasn't just her life at stake anymore, it was everyone's. The group was no longer just a bunch of bikers riding for fun. They were a team, a family, fighting to keep her safe. But the danger was still very real. As they turned onto a smaller road, Jake signaled for them to slow down. The last thing they needed was to draw attention. He led the way, his bike cutting through the night like a shadow. Aisha could feel her heart pounding in her chest as they moved deeper into unfamiliar territory. The silence was almost unbearable, the only sound the hum of their engines. And then it came. A sudden crackle of static broke the silence. Jake reached for his radio, his fingers tightening around the receiver. "This is Jake. What's the status?" The voice on the other end was sharp and urgent. "We've got a problem. They've got a whole squad on your tail. They're closer than you think. You need to get off the road. Now." Jake's face tightened. The enemy wasn't just after them. They were hunting them down, and they were closing in fast. "We'll find a place to hold up," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Everyone stay sharp. We'll make it through this." The bikers made a sharp turn off the main road, heading into the thick woods that bordered the highway. The trees seemed to close in around them, casting long shadows across the dirt path. It was the perfect place to hide, but it was also the perfect place to be ambushed. Aisha clutched Jake tighter as the bike bounced over the rough terrain. Her mind raced with fear and uncertainty, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no going back now. The bikers had made their choice. They were in this fight to the end, and Aisha was in it with them. As they slowed to a stop in a small clearing, Jake dismounted and motioned for the others to do the same. The group spread out, their eyes scanning the woods for any signs of movement. Aisha stayed close to Jake, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had never felt so alive, so terrified, and so protected all at the same time. They were on the edge now, and she could feel it. The enemy was closing in, and this was the moment where everything would change. "I hope you're still with me, because this is where everything changes." The group had moved quickly into the clearing, their bikes silent as they carefully parked them among the trees. The faint sound of distant engines still lingered in the air, a constant reminder that they were being hunted. Jake's eyes never stopped scanning the perimeter, his hand never strayed far from his weapon. The bikers were more than just a group. They were a team, a family, and they would do whatever it took to keep Aisha safe. Aisha, standing close to Jake, could feel the weight of the moment. Her heart was still pounding from the adrenaline of the past few hours, the sound of engines roaring in her ears. She wasn't just running anymore. She was part of this fight. And as much as she wanted to believe it would be over soon, she knew better. These men weren't going to stop. She hadn't realized how much danger she was in until now, how much the bikers had sacrificed just to keep her safe. She looked at the others, the faces of men and women she barely knew but had come to trust more than anyone else in her life. They weren't just saving her, they were risking everything for her. Jake crouched down next to her, his face stern. "You stay behind us. Don't move unless I tell you to," he said. Aisha nodded. She had learned quickly how to keep her composure in moments like this, but her mind was still racing. "Are we just going to sit here and wait for them to find us?" she asked, her voice shaking but determined. Jake's eyes softened as he looked at her. "We're not waiting for them," he said. "We're making our stand. And when they come, we'll be ready." The group had already spread out, each biker taking a position, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and Aisha could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The night was still, eerily quiet except for the sound of rustling leaves in the wind. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. But peace was the last thing they were going to get tonight. Suddenly, the crack of a twig echoed in the distance, and every biker tensed. Jake signaled for the group to hold their positions, his eyes locked on the shadows between the trees. He didn't speak, but the urgency in his posture said everything. The enemy was close. Aisha's heart skipped a beat as she stood, her body frozen with fear. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for had arrived. The distant rumble of engines grew louder, and she could hear the unmistakable sound of tires on gravel. The enemy was here. Jake stepped forward, his voice a low growl. Get ready. As the sound of the engines grew closer, the air seemed to tighten, the moment hanging heavy with the promise of battle. Aisha's grip tightened on her jacket, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. She had no idea who these men were, but she knew one thing. They wouldn't stop until they had her. The bikers were ready, though. They had trained for moments like this, and they had never backed down from a fight. Aisha felt a wave of respect for them, for their strength and loyalty. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was part of something bigger than herself. The bikes emerged from the trees, their headlights cutting through the night like a pair of glowing eyes. Aisha could see them now, the men who had been chasing her, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. They had come for her, and they weren't leaving without a fight. The leader, a towering figure in black leather, stepped forward, his eyes cold behind his visor. You think you can protect her? He sneered, his voice carrying across the clearing. She's ours, and we're taking her back. Jake stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on the leader. You're not taking her anywhere, he said, his voice calm but full of authority. The leader's eyes narrowed. Then we'll take her over your dead bodies. Aisha's heart pounded in her chest as the standoff began. She could feel the tension in the air, a thick, suffocating presence that made it hard to breathe. She knew what was coming. She had seen the fire in Jake's eyes, the same fire that had driven him to protect her. And she knew that the bikers wouldn't back down. They would fight for her, no matter the cost. The two sides were separated by only a few feet, the distance between them charged with animosity. The leader took a step back, motioning for his men to prepare. Jake did the same, signaling for his team to get ready. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The leader raised his hand, and the fight began. The air exploded with the sound of engines revving, of fists hitting flesh, of the clash of metal. Aisha watched in shock as the two sides collided, the bikers fighting with all their strength, their determination clear. Jake was in the middle of it all, his fists landing blow after blow as he fought to protect her. Aisha stayed close, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of the chaos unfolding before her. She couldn't help but feel the weight of what was happening, but she knew one thing. She wasn't going to be a victim anymore. With every punch thrown, every swing of a weapon, she realized that she was stronger than she had ever known. She wasn't helpless. She was part of this fight, and she would never stop fighting until it was over. I hope you're still with me because what happens next will change everything. The fight raged on in the clearing, the sound of punches and kicks colliding, the crack of helmets against hard ground echoing through the night. Aisha stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide, unable to tear them away from the chaos unfolding before her. The bikers fought with a fury she had never seen before, each one of them focused, determined to protect her at any cost. Jake, in the thick of it all, moved like a force of nature, his body a blur as he took down one of the attackers with a swift and decisive punch. The enemy was relentless, but Jake was relentless too. His eyes never wavered from his target as he fought back. Aisha's heart raced, every instinct telling her to run, to hide, but she knew she couldn't. Not anymore. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was part of this fight. She was a part of the bikers now, and they had made sure of that. The leader of the enemy group, still standing, motioned for his men to regroup. He was furious, his breathing heavy with rage. He wiped the blood from his lip and glared at Jake, his eyes filled with venom. This isn't over, he spat, his voice low and dangerous. We'll finish this. All of you will pay. Jake didn't flinch. He stood, tall, his fist still clenched. You'll have to get through us first, he said, his voice steady but laced with fury. The leader sneered, taking a step back. We'll be back. And next time, you won't have anywhere to hide. The enemy backed off, retreating into the shadows of the woods, their engines growling as they made their escape. The fight was over, for now, but the tension in the air remained thick, like a storm waiting to break. Jake turned to the group, his voice commanding. We need to move. Now. The bikers didn't hesitate. They had been through enough to know that standing still meant being vulnerable. They mounted their bikes quickly, the engines roaring to life as they sped off down the winding road. Aisha climbed onto Jake's bike, her heart still racing, but now there was a sense of clarity. They were getting out of the woods, but the danger was far from over. As the bikers rode, the night felt endless, the road stretching ahead like a dark tunnel. The headlights illuminated their path, but the shadows seemed to be closing in with every turn. Aisha couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting to see the enemy lurking in the distance, ready to strike again. But the night remained quiet, the only sound the hum of the bikes beneath them. Jake didn't speak as they rode, his focus unwavering. But Aisha could feel the weight of his determination, his drive to keep her safe. She wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running, but she knew they couldn't stop now. Where are we going? Aisha asked, her voice barely rising above the sound of the engines. Jake didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his grip firm on the handlebars. After a long moment, he finally spoke. We have a place. It's safe for now, but this isn't over. Not until we find out who's behind this. Aisha nodded, the fear still lingering in her chest. She had no idea who these people were or what they wanted from her, but she knew one thing for sure. They wouldn't stop until they had her. How will we know when it's safe? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jake glanced at her, his eyes softening for a brief moment. We'll make it safe. We'll make sure of it. They rode. On through the night, the road stretching on, an endless expanse of darkness. Aisha couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping up on her, the feeling that this was just the beginning. The bikers were strong, but even they couldn't keep her safe forever. At least, that's what she thought. But she wasn't alone anymore. As long as Jake and the others were by her side, she had a chance. The bike slowed as they reached a secluded area, a small cabin hidden in the woods. It looked abandoned, but Jake knew it was the safest place they could find. The group dismounted, the engines falling silent as they made their way to the door. Jake led the way, motioning for the others to follow. Aisha stuck close to him, her heart still pounding in her chest, her mind racing with questions. This is it, Jake said, his voice low. We stay here for the night. We'll figure out our next move in the morning. The door creaked open, and the bikers entered, their eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Aisha stepped inside last, her gaze sweeping the small, dimly lit room. It wasn't much, but it was safe, for now. The door shut behind her with a quiet thud, and the group settled in. They had made it through the fight, but the war was just beginning. Aisha knew this wasn't over. But for the first time in days, she allowed herself a breath of relief. She was safe, at least for tonight. I hope you're ready because the stakes are rising. The night passed quietly, the tension in the air palpable, but it wasn't the kind of peace anyone could truly rest in. The cabin felt too still, the weight of what had happened and what was still coming settling heavily in the small space. Jake sat at the window, his eyes scanning the darkness outside, ever watchful, never lowering his guard. The others were scattered around the room, trying to catch their breath after the battle, but no one dared let their guard down completely. Aisha sat in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. She was trying to process everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it all. The biker life was nothing like what she had imagined. Her world had been turned upside down in a matter of days, and she wasn't sure how much longer it could keep spinning like this. Her thoughts drifted back to the attack in the woods, to the men who had come for her. She didn't know who they were, or what they wanted, but she knew they weren't going to stop. And now, they had to make a plan. Jake turned his head, his voice breaking the silence. We'll be on the move again by morning. We need to get as far away from here as possible. His eyes locked with Aisha's, and there was something in his gaze that made her stomach tighten. We can't let them catch up to us again. The others nodded in agreement, but Aisha could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They were all tired, physically and mentally drained from the constant battle. It was clear that they were no strangers to danger, but even they had their limits. Where are we going? Aisha asked, her voice quiet but firm. She wasn't afraid to ask the hard questions now. She had learned too much in the last few days. There's a place up north. A safe house, Jake explained, his voice low. It's a little more secure than here, but it's not foolproof. We can stay there for a while and regroup. The thought of moving again so soon made Aisha's heart sink. She wasn't sure how much more she could take, but she knew Jake was right. Staying here meant being trapped, and being trapped meant danger. And then what? Aisha pressed, her gaze never leaving Jake's. We can't keep running forever. Jake's eyes softened, his expression turning serious. We find out who's behind this. We deal with them. The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Aisha didn't know what that meant, what kind of dealing they would do, but she knew enough about Jake and his crew to understand that this wasn't just about protecting her anymore. This had become personal for all of them. The others stood, gathering their things, preparing to move out. The cabin was small, but the weight of their mission filled every corner. Aisha had a fleeting moment of doubt, a fear that they were going into something they couldn't handle. But there was no turning back now. She had to trust them, just as they trusted each other. Jake stood, motioning for Aisha to follow. Stay close, he said, his tone softer now. We're in this together. Aisha nodded, standing up slowly, her legs still shaky from everything that had happened. As they walked toward the door, the air felt different, colder somehow, as if the weight of what lay ahead was already bearing down on them. They stepped outside, the dark night wrapping around them like a blanket. The bikes were ready, the engines growling to life as they mounted and began to ride. Jake took the lead, his eyes scanning the road ahead, his body tense as if every turn, every shadow could be a threat. Aisha rode behind him, clutching him tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to fight the urge to look back, to make sure no one was following them. But she knew she couldn't afford that kind of fear. The moment they left the safety of the cabin, they were back in the fight. They rode for hours, the road stretching endlessly before them. Aisha felt the wind biting at her face, the noise of the bikes filling her ears, but even as they sped through the night, the weight of her thoughts didn't lift. Who were these men? Why did they want her? And how far would Jake and the others go to protect her? She didn't have answers, but for the first time, she realized she wasn't looking for them anymore. All she needed to do was survive. The road ahead was long, but the path was clear. They would get to the safe house, they would regroup, and then they would take the fight to whoever was after her. And Aisha knew, deep down, that she wouldn't be alone in that fight. The night passed, and the group kept riding, pushing forward into the unknown. But one thing was certain. They weren't going to stop until they had answers, until they had the justice they were fighting for. And Aisha was going to stand beside them every step of the way. I hope you're still with me because the tension is about to hit its peak. As the bikers continued their ride through the night, the road stretched endlessly before them. Aisha sat close behind Jake, the wind biting against her face, but it was the thought of what was coming that chilled her to the bone. The promise of safety was fleeting, and the uncertainty of their next move hung over them like a storm cloud. Hours passed, and the road remained empty, but the further they went, the more Aisha felt like something was closing in. It wasn't just the distance between them and the attackers. It was the sense of being pursued, like shadows were always just behind them, always ready to strike. Jake's grip on the handlebars tightened, his eyes scanning the road ahead. He had said they were getting closer to the safe house, but Aisha didn't feel safe. Not yet. Her mind raced with questions. What if they were being watched? What if the enemy had already set up a trap? But she knew better than to voice her fears. The bikers had been through so much already. They wouldn't stop now. As they reached a fork in the road, Jake gave a subtle signal, and the group veered left, following a small, unmarked path that wound through the woods. The sound of the engines reverberated in the trees, but the feeling of safety was still out of reach. We're almost there, Jake said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of urgency. Aisha's heart skipped a beat. Almost there. But what did that mean? As they slowed to a stop, the bikes kicked up dust, and Jake signaled for everyone to dismount. The area they had stopped in was quiet, but something in the air felt wrong. Jake's eyes narrowed as he glanced around, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife tucked into his belt. Stay close, he ordered, his tone firm. Aisha obeyed, her body tense, her senses on high alert. The group moved forward, their footsteps muffled in the soft earth beneath them. Every crack of a twig, every rustling of the leaves, made Aisha's heart race. She had no idea who might be lurking in the woods, but she knew that they were far from safe. They reached the entrance to a small, abandoned cabin hidden deep in the woods. The door creaked as Jake pushed it open, and the group filed in one by one, weapons drawn, their eyes sharp for any sign of danger. The inside was dark, cold, and musty. There were remnants of old furniture scattered around. Nothing valuable, just the bones of a place that had been forgotten by time. Aisha's eyes scanned the room, but she didn't feel comforted by the isolation. The cabin may have been secluded, but it felt like a trap. The group settled in, keeping their voices low. Jake paced the room, his gaze never lingering for long on any one spot. He wasn't just being cautious, he was waiting for something to happen. Aisha could feel the weight of his attention, and she couldn't help but look around nervously. They were out of the open, yes, but they weren't in the clear yet. Jake finally stopped pacing and looked at the others. We hold up here for the night. Everyone stay alert. No one leaves unless I say so. The others nodded, their faces grim, but they didn't need to be told twice. Jake's leadership was unquestionable. He had earned their loyalty long ago. The bikers gathered around, speaking in hushed tones, checking their gear, preparing for whatever came next. Aisha found herself sitting on a dusty chair in the corner of the room, her mind still racing. She was exhausted, both physically and mentally, but sleep seemed impossible. The weight of what they were up against, the knowledge that the enemy could be closing in at any moment, kept her wide awake. She glanced up at Jake, who was now speaking with wrench, his voice low and urgent. She couldn't make out their words, but she could see the concern in their expressions. They were planning something. The question was, what? She had never felt more out of place. She wasn't just a bystander in this fight anymore. She was a target, a pawn in a game far bigger than she could understand. And while Jake and the others made their plans, Aisha felt the gnawing fear in her stomach. It wasn't just the bikers' fight anymore. It was hers, too. She wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running, but she knew one thing. They couldn't stay here forever. She had to prepare herself. As the night deepened, the sounds of the forest outside became louder, more ominous. The wind whistled through the trees, and the distant call of an owl echoed in the night. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Aisha's grip tightened on the edge of the chair as she stood up, her legs still shaky. She needed to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait for them to come to her. She wasn't that helpless little girl anymore. She had learned from the bikers, learned what it meant to fight for survival. And if the time came, she would fight. She would fight for herself, for the bikers, and for the future they were all trying to protect. Her thoughts were interrupted by Jake's voice. We move out at first light. Get some rest while you can. The words were simple, but there was a weight behind them. Aisha nodded and slowly made her way back to the chair, but sleep still evaded her. The night felt endless, and the fight ahead seemed impossible. But Aisha knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, she would face it head on. She wasn't running anymore. Not from her past. Not from her fears. She was ready to take control of her own future. I hope you're ready because what comes next is the beginning of the end. The night passed with a heavy stillness, the silence of the woods surrounding them like a suffocating blanket. Jake and the bikers had kept watch, eyes sharp, alert to every sound in the distance. But for the most part, the night remained eerily quiet. Aisha sat near the window, her back pressed against the cold wall, her mind replaying the events that had led her here. Every time she closed her eyes, the images of the fight, the dark figures who had chased her, and the constant fear of being caught replayed in her head like a broken record. But the most overwhelming thought in her mind was one question. How much longer could they keep running? The bikers had given her protection, a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in a long time. But Aisha knew the reality. They couldn't keep moving forever. The weight of what was to come was heavy, and it was only a matter of time before the enemy would find them again. She pushed those thoughts aside, forcing herself to focus on the present. They had made it through the night, and now, at first light, they would move again. Jake had said they were heading north to a safe house. But even that promise felt uncertain now. The group was tired, mentally and physically drained from the constant battle. Aisha felt it too. Her body ached from the adrenaline, and sleep had been a distant memory. Jake's voice cut through the quiet, a low growl that held authority and command. We move out in 5. Get ready. The bikers didn't question him. They were all too used to the rhythm of this life. Constantly on the move, constantly alert. Aisha stood, stretching her legs, trying to shake off the heaviness in her bones. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt at ease, and she wasn't sure if she would ever feel safe again. She glanced at Jake, who was speaking to Wrench, his voice low but serious. "We need to get ahead of them," Jake said, his eyes narrowing. "We can't afford to be caught off guard." Wrench nodded, his face set in determination. "I'll handle the route. We'll take the back roads, stay under the radar." The plan was simple, but Aisha could see the tension in their eyes. No one could shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. As the bikers began to prepare, checking their gear and mounting their bikes, Aisha felt a pang of fear deep in her chest. She wasn't just an observer anymore. She was a part of this fight. She had seen the lengths these bikers would go to for each other, for her. And while she had been running for so long, she knew that this was it. The moment when everything changed. The moment when they would either make it out of this alive or risk it all. "You okay?" Jake's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to look at him. His face was serious, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "I'm fine," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Just a little nervous, I guess." Jake gave her a reassuring smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We all are," he said. "But we'll get through this. We'll make sure you're safe." His words were comforting, but Aisha couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. The enemy was out there, somewhere, watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. But Jake's presence, the way he carried himself with such confidence, gave her a sliver of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. She was with them, and together, they could survive whatever came next. The bikers started their engines, the familiar roar of the bikes filling the air. Aisha climbed onto Jake's bike, her heart pounding in her chest. She wrapped her arms around him, the wind whipping against her face as they sped off into the unknown. The road ahead was unclear, but there was no turning back now. As they rode, the landscape shifted from dense woods to open fields, the vastness of the land stretching out before them. It felt like they were escaping, but Aisha knew that this was only temporary. The danger wasn't behind them. It was just waiting to catch up. They rode for hours, staying off the main roads as much as possible, but the tension remained. Aisha kept her eyes on the horizon, her mind racing with every twist and turn. Where were they going? What would they find when they arrived? But Jake didn't speak. He kept his focus on the road ahead, navigating the winding paths with ease. The others stayed close, their bikes forming a tight formation as they continued forward. As the sun began to rise, casting a faint light on the horizon, Jake slowed down, signaling for the group to stop. They had reached the safe house. The area was quiet, hidden behind a thick layer of trees. It was exactly what they needed: seclusion, shelter, and a place to regroup. Jake gave the signal, and the bikers dismounted, checking their surroundings carefully. Aisha dismounted as well, her legs shaky from the long ride. Jake walked up to her, his face serious. "We're safe for now," he said. "But this isn't over. We need to find out who's behind this, and we need to be ready for when they come for us." Aisha nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't sure what the next step was, but for the first time in a while, she felt like she could breathe. She was no longer running. She was standing her ground. And with the bikers by her side, she wasn't afraid to face whatever came next. "I hope you're ready for the final showdown." The safe house had provided the temporary solace they needed, but it was just that, temporary. Jake knew this wasn't over. They had a plan, but plans often fell apart the moment reality hit. The group had settled in quickly, the bikes parked in a secluded area hidden by trees, their engines silent. The night had been long, but the moment the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, they knew it was time to act. Jake gathered the group in the small, dimly lit room of the cabin, his voice low and steady. "This is it. We find them today. We put an end to this." The bikers nodded, each face hardened with resolve. There was no more running. There was no more hiding. The past few days had been a whirlwind of fear, violence, and uncertainty, but now it was time to take the fight to those who had made her life a nightmare. Aisha stood to the side, her heart pounding in her chest. The fear still lingered, but something else had replaced it, a sense of purpose. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She had fought alongside these people. She had survived, and now she was ready to take action. She had to be. "What's the plan?" one of the bikers, Wrench, asked, his voice gruff but eager. "We've got some intel," Jake said, his eyes scanning the group. "We know where they're based. They've been hiding out in an old warehouse down by the docks." The mention of the docks sent a shiver down Aisha's spine. It wasn't just any place. It was a dead zone, a spot where no one would come looking. It was the perfect hideout for anyone who wanted to stay hidden. Jake continued, his voice steady. "We'll take the back roads, get close to the warehouse without being seen. We'll move fast. Once we get there, we do what we need to do. No mistakes." Aisha glanced around at the bikers, their faces determined but tired. They had been through a lot, but there was no hesitation in their eyes now. They were in this together, and nothing was going to stop them. She had come to realize that in the past few days, they weren't just saving her, they were a family. And that family would do anything to protect each other. The plan was set, and without wasting any more time, they prepared to leave the cabin. The sound of engines firing up was a welcome break from the silence. Aisha climbed onto Jake's bike, settling into the familiar position behind him. She gripped him tightly as they set off, the wind rushing past them, the world flying by in a blur of motion. As they sped through the quiet back roads, Aisha's thoughts were a mix of fear and determination. They were getting closer. Every mile was one step closer to finding out who had been behind this, and putting an end to it. The group rode in tight formation, the sound of their engines reverberating through the empty streets. There was no turning back now. As they neared the docks, the air seemed to shift. The place felt wrong. The buildings were old, abandoned, and the area was filled with a sense of foreboding. It was the kind of place where secrets were buried, where bad things happened, and no one ever asked questions. Jake signaled for the group to stop a few hundred yards away from the warehouse. They dismounted, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the area. The air was thick with tension. Aisha felt her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. She was about to confront the enemy, the ones who had chased her for so long, the ones who had destroyed her life. Jake gave the signal, and the group began to move toward the warehouse. They moved silently, slipping through the shadows, their steps muffled on the pavement. Aisha stayed close to Jake, her breath shallow, her body tense. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing for sure. The time for hiding was over. They reached the entrance of the warehouse, and Jake motioned for them to wait. He moved to the door, his eyes sharp, scanning for any movement. When he was satisfied, he gave a quick nod, and the group moved in. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from a few flickering overhead bulbs. The smell of oil and rust filled the air, and the silence was deafening. Aisha's heart was racing now, but she kept her eyes on Jake, following his every move. They moved deeper into the warehouse, their steps careful but quick. The place was a maze of crates and old equipment. It was exactly the kind of place you'd hide if you had something to hide. And as they rounded a corner, they saw them. The men who had been after Aisha. They were standing in a small group, their backs turned, talking amongst themselves. It was clear they hadn't expected anyone to find them this quickly. Jake's voice was low but full of authority. "It's over," he said, stepping forward. The men turned at the sound of his voice, eyes narrowing as they saw the bikers standing in front of them. The leader of the group sneered, his hand going to the gun at his side. "You really think you can stop us?" he spat. Jake stepped forward, his face hard. "You're done." The standoff was brief, the air heavy with anticipation. The bikers were ready. They had nothing left to lose. With a sudden movement, the fight began. Fists, feet, and weapons collided in a blur of violence. But the bikers were faster, stronger, and more determined. Within minutes, the enemies were on the ground, disarmed and incapacitated. Aisha stood frozen, her breath coming in short gasps, as she watched the last of the men fall. The fight was over. The nightmare was over. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew one thing. She was free, and she would never be running again. She looked at Jake, her heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jake nodded, his eyes softening. "We're family," he said. "We protect each other." And for the first time in a long time, Aisha felt a sense of peace. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found her place, and she would fight for it. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk now. And with the bikers by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. Hell Angel stories are filled with action, loyalty, and intense moments that keep you on the edge of your seat. In this gripping tale, a young girl finds herself on the run from an enemy she barely understands. As she is chased by dangerous individuals, she stumbles into the world of bikers, finding unexpected protection and allies in a group of determined individuals who will do anything to keep her safe. Hell Angels stories dive deep into themes of survival, strength, and the bonds that hold people together in the face of danger. As the story unfolds, the group of bikers faces impossible odds, taking on dangerous enemies who won't stop until they get what they want. But the bikers, united in their mission to protect the girl, show what true loyalty means. With the intensity of each fight and the ongoing pursuit, the Hell Angels stories never let up, always pushing the characters to their limits. From secret hideouts to high-speed chases, these stories highlight the resilience and determination of individuals facing the worst of situations. In the end, the fight for freedom, safety, and survival becomes the central theme, reminding us all of the lengths people will go to protect the ones they care about. Hell Angels stories encapsulate the spirit of rebellion, brotherhood, and the unwavering courage that fuels these incredible journeys. This particular story weaves together intense action, moments of heart-pounding suspense, and the unbreakable bonds that define a family, no matter the blood that connects them. Whether you're a fan of motorcycles or just love stories about survival and fighting back against the odds, Hell Angel stories have something for everyone.